wave of people really seriously convinced of the fact, how can it be that we had a prime minister in Baden-Württemberg? This is where the federal state prime minister, Kiesinger, who was a judge in Nazi days. And I think in 1945, in March or so, he was part of a jurisdiction who said, some of these deserteurs, how do you say that deserters, were put to death because they had deserted the Wehrmacht, and he was on the trial. He condemned them to be hanged in 28th of March 1945, 6 weeks before everything was over. And this guy becomes prime minister in one of the most important federal states in West Germany after the war. This is incredible. So there was this famous scene when this German-French political scientists walk up on some party congress and really slapped him in the face. That's one of the most, well-known events in post-German history, because she said, you say you're a Democrat, but you were on this panel, and you're not the one who should be prime minister here in this federal state, not in the country, but still. So, and of course, yes, we have a lot of what is called, I think the term is horrible, Holocaust education. I think this term is awful, but that's what you try to teach the Holocaust in order to identify the instruments these people use to ostracize the other. And we have a long history in that, and there's a lot of teaching in the universities, and of course we were lucky, in inverted. I met so many survivors who told their stories. I mean, if you have ever met a survivor, who will seriously say this is all made up? That can't be. So we were lucky in a way, because we had so many people of that character, and I know so many survivors and their relatives who go into schools and who speak with kids and who draw the connections between then and today and try to show, if you have to stand up now, if this Jewish kid in your school is harassed, it's your duty to stand up and defend him, even though you're not a Jew, and not to stand, things like that. So.
Well, a nice counterexample of what happens when the past is not confronted is that Austria chose to look at itself as a victimized country, even though they welcomed the Germans into Austria in 1938. And Kurt Waldheim made it to Secretary General of the United Nations. And I know historians who were telling me a decade before he was officially unmasked that he was a Nazi.
Mm-hmm.
That was an open secret.
What is the Muslim population of Germany?
Oh, I'm so bad at numbers. I think there would be probably about 7 to 8 million, so about 8 to 10%, because we invited many of Turkish. I mean, many of them are Muslims, like many of us are Christians. We go to church on Christmas Day, full stop, forget about the rest. And one of the things also is, which I might have mentioned, Berlin at the moment is extremely popular with people from Israel. Mostly young people, and they're not usually the ones who are very active in the synagogues, etc. So they're atheistic people from Israel coming to Berlin to live there in great numbers. I think there's more than 20,000 people, young people from Israel alone, in Berlin. So it should be 6, maybe 8 million people, and because we invited the Turkish guest workers after the war to rebuild among others, but there are about roughly 3.5 to 4 million people who are either who came from Turkey themselves or their parents came and they have some of that background.
Thank you.
I want to address what he said from the Jewish perspective, because it's one that I know very well. Several people in the room today know a little bit about what I've been involved in, and as I mentioned at the beginning, I am a German citizen now. This was a remarkable decision to make and not an easy one to make. And it ties in with what he was saying. I was raised pretty much by a single mother. As I said, my father died when I was 11. And my mother, my entire life, was very vocal about anything Germany related. She hated Germany, she hated Germans. And after my grandparents died in Würzburg in the early 50s, both my parents said they would never set foot in Germany again. That was the only reason they had returned to Germany, and they never did. Even though my mother was invited several times to go back to Leipzig, she refused to go. And this was the backdrop of my childhood. So it was very difficult, or I should say very easy, to be influenced by that, which I was. And I realized it was rooted in fear. It wasn't like, you know, anti-Semitism. It was rooted in fear. My mother was paranoid her entire life. You don't just shrug off what happened during the Holocaust. It stays with you and it impacts the next generation, which is people of my age. There were a series of events that led up to what I decided to do. And before I even became a German citizen, I was involved in a very unprecedented memorial project, Stolpersteine, which any of you have ever been to Germany have seen, and they are now in other countries. They're these little, about 6-inch square memorial stones that are sunk into the ground in front, on the public sidewalk, in front of the buildings where the person last lived. And I was involved in a huge project which started by one stone, and it was amazing. And the person who was headed up that project, we sort of struck up a friendship by email, and there came a point when he said, you should come back to Berlin. And it's like, I don't know about that. It was not on my radar, but as time went by, I realized I needed to do that. I needed to see for myself, not only where my family had lived, but what was happening in Germany today. And that was a huge turning point for me. I've been to Germany 4 times now, and everything the consul is saying is true. I would never in a million years have decided to become a German citizen, which, by the way, I was entitled to, because my family was stripped of their German citizenship. So it was getting back what had been taken away, a very small part of what was taken away, but I wanted it back. And I'm very glad I did it, because for me, it is about moving forward. You cannot change the past. I will never forget what happened. I will never forgive what happened. But we have to move forward in order to prevent exactly what he was saying is still happening in Germany and even in Berlin today. In addition to the incident that he described, which was very well publicized, there was another one which was really dear to my heart, because it involved a restaurant which I love going to, an Israeli restaurant called Feinberg's, and it makes me think of Larry Feinberg every time I go there. Although it has nothing to do with the name, where the owner, who's an Israeli, was standing out in front smoking a cigarette, and this German man came by and started totally hurling insult after him, and what are you doing here, and you should have been gassed, and the usual stuff. And he kept his calm, and eventually the police were called. But and someone had videoed this whole thing, so when it hit the news, in typical German fashion, and I was very proud, all these people started coming to Feinberg's restaurant. You know, it was inundated, Germans showing their support against an anti-Semitic event. It was also fascinating to me, by the way, in your slideshow, Dennis's slideshow, where there was one shot of the Zoologische Garten station. That's the one I use every time I go to Berlin, because I always stay around there, and it was amazing to see it. So anyway, if I didn't feel positive about the overall stance that Germany has, I would never have made the next decision to become a German citizen. I don't need it. I'm British, I'm American, I just wanted it. And I will never be totally comfortable in Germany, never. I realize that now. I cannot. It's too deep and too entrenched. But every time I go, there's some form of familiarity, which it's hard even to put into words, makes me feel better about the situation. And Germany has made tremendous strides in acknowledging what they've done. They don't sweep it under the rug like other countries do, like Poland, who's busy rewriting their history. Hungary is another one. They didn't start it over there, but they were very complicit in helping the Nazis murder all these Jews. Germany acknowledges, as he said, what they've done. They've got monuments all over the place, continuing to always put out more. And I think this is very important in moving forward, which is the only thing we can do.
Any more questions? Or did I talk you into the ground?
I think it would be a general comment that most of the Western democracies are under a lot of stress and duress. Do you have any comments?
Could you speak up?
Do you have any comments to make with respect to the structure of Western democracies and the need for change? I'm thinking of, you look at certain countries have basically a two-party system. Some countries have a multi-party system, which I think is along the lines in Germany. Do you see the need for structural change in our forms of government?
That is a very broad topic for another two-day conference. What do I think? On the one hand, but I can say a few things to that. The one thing is, yes, I'm a European, and in contrast to the US, Europe is very small, and there are tons of countries, and they all have a million years of history. So if the UK has a two-party system, fine, let them have their two-party system. I don't think, there's no way you can, and it's not, it shouldn't be done. I don't think it would be a wise idea to say you now have to have a different political system or so. The thing is, I think within the wide range of democratic systems, the important thing is to look at the values and how they are kept, how they are promoted, how you deal with the basic assumptions in your democratic constitutions. So I don't think there's a one-fits-all solution. And of course, I'm also very convinced EU disciple, that's the word? Yes, European Union disciple. So I think the European Union is the best thing we have done in the last, well, not we Europeans have done in the last, 65 years, 70 years. But it only works when you keep the differences alive and when you keep the regional and local specificities alive, and that's very easily possible. That's the one part. The second thing I say, of course, there is, your president would say we are in a competition against China, and this is one world power, and China is another potential world power, emerging world power, whatever. So there is, of course, a lot of competition between the US and China. And in the broader sense, there's a competition between the US and the democratic societies in the world on the one hand, and China and other totalitarian systems on the other hand. And when you look at all the new technologies developing, not in the least in Silicon Valley and in California or in other parts of the US, there I see sort of another structural deficit of democracies when compared to more dictatorial systems. They are much more ready to use the new technologies to influence people. They are much better in a position to take decisions, faster decisions on very central issues, and they are much more in a position to implement these decisions within their population. So I think the problem is more that we have to be, I'm not sort of supporting the idea of getting, a dictatorial system in Germany or in the West or in the US, but I'm saying, well, if you compare the democratic system with non-democratic systems, in very many contexts, these non-democratic systems are at an advantage, and that's what we have to see, and we have to find answers how to deal with that in order to decide some very crucial questions. I think that's more the danger in a way than yeah.
I don't want to open up too big a subject here. What is, because it's probably no simple answer, but what is Germany's relationship with the state government of Israel? How supportive of it? Like the United States recently moved the embassy to Jerusalem. Does Germany get involved that way, or does it kind of realize it's maybe some dicey situations there? How supportive of it is it of the present government?
Well, that exactly is sort of capturing the question. Germany is very supportive, extremely supportive of the state of Israel, full stop. So every single chancellor, starting from Konrad Adenauer to Angela Merkel nowadays, have repeated that, and this has been like one of the holy enshrined sentences, and not only sentences. It's really, I do believe that each and every one of these